Have you ever wondered what secrets the person you love most might be hiding? In 1965, Harold Jenkins met Martha Williams at a small bakery in Portland, Oregon, sparking a love story that would span over 5 decades. But beneath their seemingly perfect marriage lay a truth so profound it would redefine everything Harold thought he knew about his wife. This is the story of a love built on trust, tested by secrets, and ultimately strengthened by the courage to face the truth. Why should you watch this video until the end? Because it's more than a romance. It's a gripping tale of resilience, identity, and the power of unconditional love. As you follow Harold and Martha's journey, you'll uncover the emotional twists of Martha's hidden past, a secret she carried through 55 years of marriage. This video will keep you hooked with its heartfelt moments, shocking revelations, and a climactic hospital scene that changes everything. You'll see how love can endure even the deepest betrayals and how one couple's commitment inspired a legacy of hope. From their first meeting to a tearful vow renewal, this story offers lessons on trust, forgiveness, and the strength to start anew. Don't miss the chance to witness a narrative that proves love isn't about perfection. It's about accepting each other, flaws and all. Stick with us to the end for an inspiring conclusion that will leave you reflecting on your relationships. If you are not subscribed, subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Your support means a lot to me, and if you enjoyed this video, you can help me continue spreading the valuable lessons by liking and sharing it. If you like the topic of this video, please comment 1. If you don't, please comment 0 to let me know how I can improve and make better videos for you. Now, let's begin. Martha, at 26, was a passionate and dedicated third-grade teacher at Lincoln Elementary School, where she had built a reputation for creating a classroom brimming with colorful decorations and warmth. It was a place where even the most difficult students felt seen, valued, and, in some cases, understood for the first time. Martha had a unique gift, the ability to make every child feel special. Her kindness and energy were contagious, and everyone who entered her classroom couldn't help but be drawn into the magic she created. She had this rare ability to reach her students on a level beyond the lessons in books. She nurtured their spirits. It was after a chance meeting at a bakery that Harold's heart began to beat with a newfound excitement. He was a regular at Miller's Bakery, known for its aromatic pastries and cozy atmosphere. But one fateful morning, a simple, fleeting encounter with Martha made him feel something stir deep within him. For the next few days, Harold found himself eagerly returning, hoping to see her again. It was on the 3rd day that fate smiled upon him. Martha returned. And this time, Harold gathered every ounce of courage he had and asked her out on a dinner date. His heart raced as he spoke the words, hoping she'd say yes. "I thought you'd never ask," Martha replied with a twinkle in her eyes, her smile so radiant that it lit up the entire room. That moment, simple yet profound, left Harold feeling as if he had just unlocked a treasure chest of possibility. Their first date was a night neither of them would forget. At Giovanni's Italian restaurant, Harold arrived early. He couldn't help it, the anticipation had him so jittery. He nervously adjusted his tie, catching glimpses of his reflection in the window, his mind racing with thoughts of what might come. Martha, on the other hand, walked in looking effortlessly graceful, wearing a simple yet stunning blue dress that matched the depth of her eyes. The moment they sat down, the world seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them. 4 hours, they exchanged stories and laughter. Harold was surprised at how easily the conversation flowed. There was no awkwardness, no forced small talk. They discovered that they shared a love for mystery novels, classical music, and long walks in Forest Park. As they talked, Harold felt like he had known Martha his entire life. "I've never met anyone so easy to talk to," he confessed to his friend Bill the following day. "It feels like we've known each other for years." As their relationship blossomed, Harold found himself growing more and more enamored with Martha. By the 5th date, he knew deep down that she was someone truly special. When he spoke of his dreams, his ambition of one day owning his accounting firm, Martha listened with genuine interest, never dismissing his hopes, no matter how big they seemed. Even more endearing was the way she accepted all of him, quirks and all. When Harold shyly admitted that he had a hobby of collecting stamps, something he had kept to himself for years, she didn't laugh or mock him. Instead, she leaned in, her curiosity piqued, and asked him about rare finds and special editions, showing an interest that made him feel heard and valued. But what Harold admired most about Martha was her unwavering commitment to her students. She would often stay after school, tirelessly working on special learning materials for children who struggled with reading. There was no greater joy for her than helping a child unlock the magic of learning. What truly touched Harold's heart was how she used her own money to buy books for students who couldn't afford them. "Every child deserves a chance to love learning," she told him one afternoon as they walked through the park. Her words resonated deeply with Harold, and as they walked, the sound of fallen leaves crunching beneath their feet seemed to echo the quiet admiration he felt for the woman by his side. 6 months after they met, Harold knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that Martha was the one. On a crisp, clear October day, with the sun casting a golden glow over the familiar bakery where their story had begun, Harold knelt on one knee and asked the question that had been on his heart for so long. "Martha, will you marry me?" The entire shop erupted into applause as Martha, her eyes brimming with tears, said yes. Harold's heart swelled with joy as he realized that this woman, this incredible woman, was going to be his forever. They married in a simple ceremony in December, surrounded by just a few close friends and family. Martha wore her mother's wedding dress, altered slightly to fit her taller frame, and as she walked down the aisle, Harold couldn't contain his smile. He had never felt more certain of anything in his life. Surrounded by 40 friends and family members, they exchanged vows, pledging to love, honor, and cherish one another for all the years to come. Neither of them came from wealth, and they started their new life together in a small rented apartment, making do with what they had. Each evening, they sat at their modest kitchen table, planning for the future while savoring the simple meals that Martha lovingly prepared. "We don't need much," she often said with a warm smile, "just each other." At the time, Harold had no idea that Martha was hiding a secret, one that would remain a mystery for most of their life together. It wasn't until much later that he would come to understand the weight of that secret, but for now, they were happy. They had each other, and that was enough. By the summer of 1970, they had saved enough money to buy their first home, a modest 2-bedroom house on Maple Street. The garden had been neglected by the previous owners, but Martha saw potential in the overgrown space. "We can plant roses here," she said, her voice filled with excitement as she pointed to a sunny spot near the fence. "And maybe a vegetable garden in the back." Harold wasn't much of a gardener, but seeing Martha's enthusiasm made him eager to help. Together, they spent weekends pulling weeds, turning soil, and planting seeds. Harold built a wooden bench under a large oak tree, and they often sat there in the evenings, watching fireflies dance in the fading light. Their neighbors quickly grew fond of them. Martha never forgot a birthday or anniversary, and she baked her famous apple pies for every occasion. Harold, always happy to lend a hand, helped the elderly Mr. Wilson with his taxes each April. As the years passed, they became an integral part of their small community. Harold's career at Thompson & Sons flourished. His boss, Mr. Thompson, frequently praised him, saying, "Jenkins is the most reliable man I know." But no matter how successful Harold became, he always knew that the true joy of his life came from Martha. Her kindness, her intelligence, and her unwavering dedication to others. Martha continued teaching, and her reputation as a gifted educator grew. Children who had struggled in other classrooms thrived under her care. Parents specifically requested her class, knowing their children would receive the best education possible. One night, as Martha decorated Valentine's Day cards for her students, Harold looked at her with deep admiration. "You have a gift," he told her. "Those children are lucky to have you." As she smiled back at him, Harold noticed something flicker in her eyes, something like sadness, like a memory she was holding onto, one that she wasn't ready to share. But just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. He wondered if he had imagined it. Whatever it was, it didn't change the love he felt for her. She was his everything, and together, they had built a life that was as rich in love and purpose as it was in simple, everyday joys. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 1 below to let me know that you are still here with me. In 1972, Harold and Martha faced a heartbreaking challenge that tested the very core of their relationship. After 2 years of yearning for a child, they were met with the crushing news from doctors that Martha couldn't have children. The weight of that revelation hung heavy in the air, especially for Martha, whose spirit seemed to shrink under the weight of the news. For 3 days, she hardly spoke a word, her eyes swollen and red from an endless stream of tears. In the silence of their home, the emptiness between them seemed palpable, and the unspoken sorrow filled every room. But Harold, ever the steady presence, reached for her hand across their kitchen table, the space between them feeling like the distance of 1,000 miles. "We still have each other," he said, his voice filled with conviction, though his heart ached for her. "And you have 30 children every year who adore you." In his simple, unflinching words, there was love and understanding. Slowly, the fog of sadness began to lift. Martha threw herself into her work with renewed fervor, dedicating herself to her students as though they were the children she had always dreamed of having. Harold suggested adoption, but Martha, her heart still raw, was hesitant. "Maybe someday," she would say, her voice soft, distant. It was around this time that she first mentioned her cousin in Chicago, a distant relative she had never spoken of before. "Ella is sick," she told Harold one quiet evening, her voice tinged with concern. "I should visit her. She doesn't have anyone else." Harold, always understanding, didn't hesitate for a second. "Of course, you should go. How long will you be away?" he asked, eager to support her. "Just a week," Martha replied, already packing a small suitcase. "She lives alone in an apartment downtown." When Martha returned from that first trip, Harold noticed a subtle shift in her. She was quieter, her usual spark dimmed just slightly. Sometimes he would find her staring out the window, lost in thought, as if her mind was far away. When he asked if everything was okay, she would flash him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and say, "Just tired from the journey." And yet, after a few days, the Martha he knew and loved returned, cheerful, loving, and full of life. As the years passed, Harold and Martha settled into a gentle rhythm, finding joy in the small, everyday moments that made life beautiful. Every Sunday, they drove together to church in their blue Chevrolet, their routine providing a sense of stability. They hosted dinners for friends, colleagues, and neighbors, always striving to bring warmth and joy into the lives of those around them. During summer breaks, they took simple trips to the coast, collecting seashells and building sandcastles as if they were children again. It wasn't an extraordinary life by the standards of grand adventure, but it was enough. A life filled with love, small joys, and deep, unwavering contentment. Yet, through all of this, Harold often found himself marveling at Martha. As he watched her across a room, reading, cooking, or laughing with friends, he couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This incredible woman, with her quiet strength and boundless kindness, had chosen to share her life with him. How had he gotten so lucky? Every few years, Martha would visit her cousin Elaine in Chicago, and each time she returned, there was a subtle shift in her, quieter, more reserved for a few days, as though she were processing something deep and personal. Harold never questioned these changes. He believed in giving people space when they needed it. After all, everyone had their private thoughts and their struggles. What Harold didn't know was that these trips to Chicago were hiding a secret, a truth Martha carried with her that would remain veiled for decades. It began in 1975 when Martha received a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon that left her visibly shaken. Harold noticed the change in her, how her shoulders stiffened, how she spoke quietly, turning away from him as though trying to protect him from something. When she told him that she needed to visit Elaine again, Harold sensed the urgency in her voice. "It's urgent," she said, her eyes shadowed with worry. "Is everything okay?" Harold asked, concern etching his features. "Yes, just some family matters," Martha replied quickly, not meeting his gaze. "I'll only be gone for 4 days." Harold, ever the supportive husband, drove her to the airport the next morning, and as they said their goodbyes, Martha hugged him tighter than usual, whispering, "I love you. Never forget that." When she returned, there was something different about her. She brought Harold a small wooden music box. "A gift from Chicago," she said, her smile forced. For nearly a week after her return, Martha seemed on edge. She jumped at sudden noises, double-checked the locks on the doors and windows, and watched people carefully as they walked through the neighborhood. Harold noticed these changes but chose not to press. He believed that when someone needed space, it was important to give it to them. And so life continued as it always had, with these subtle shifts that Harold never questioned. Until one day, when he found the locked wooden box in the attic. It was pushed far back under the eaves, a forgotten relic of the past. When he mentioned it to Martha, she dismissed it quickly, her hands trembling slightly as she served their dinner. "Oh, that's just some old papers and keepsakes," she said, her voice tight. Harold offered to move it, but she refused. "No, it's fine where it is," she said, her tone sharp. That night, as Harold lay in bed, he could hear Martha's footsteps in the attic, the soft creak of the floorboards above. He wondered what could be inside that box that seemed so important to her. But he didn't ask. Trust had always been the cornerstone of their relationship, and in their marriage, that trust was more important than any curiosity. As the years passed, Martha's trips to Chicago grew less frequent, and by the time they reached their 60s, Harold had all but stopped wondering about them. They had built a beautiful life together, a life full of love, respect, and deep connection. But what Harold didn't know was that Martha's secret, one that had remained hidden for nearly 40 years, was about to come to light, changing everything he thought he knew about their life together. By 2010, Martha had stopped visiting Chicago altogether, and Harold, now in his 80s, was content. Their life had grown quieter and more reflective, but still full of love. But as time passed, Harold began to feel unusually tired. At first, he chalked it up to old age and the changing seasons, but as his exhaustion grew, Martha insisted he see a doctor. "It's probably nothing," he reassured her as she helped him put on his coat. But deep down, Harold knew something was wrong. Little did he know. His health struggles were only the beginning of a revelation that would change everything he thought he knew about his beloved Martha. The doctor's office called 3 days later, and with the unsettling ring of the phone, Harold felt his heart sink. The test results were back, and they weren't good. He needed to head to Portland General Hospital immediately for more tests. Anxiety began to cloud his thoughts, but he pushed it aside. Within a week, the diagnosis came: advanced pancreatic cancer that had already spread to his liver. "How long?" Harold asked, his voice calm, though deep inside, his world was crumbling. Martha, who had been trying to keep it together for him, couldn't hold back her tears any longer. She sat silently by his side, her eyes filled with helplessness and sorrow, as Harold braced himself for the worst. The doctor spoke gently, his voice filled with an empathy that softened the sharpness of the words. "Without treatment, a few months at most," he said, his eyes briefly meeting Martha's, as if trying to offer some silent reassurance. "With aggressive treatment, perhaps a year, but the quality of life would be compromised." Harold paused, absorbing the weight of it all. He looked at Martha, his steady gaze betraying none of the pain that he felt inside. He knew what he had to do. "I've had a good run," he said softly, the words carrying the weight of a lifetime of memories. "I'd rather have a few good months than a painful year." Martha didn't argue. She had known Harold long enough to understand that when he made up his mind, there was no changing it. She simply nodded, her heart breaking for him, for both of them. 3 weeks later, Harold's condition worsened rapidly. He was admitted to the hospital as his body seemed to betray him more and more each day. Martha remained by his side, her love and devotion unwavering. She read to him, or simply held his hand, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm that was his health. The nurses, who had seen the same heartbreaking scene unfold so many times before, grew fond of Martha, bringing her coffee, making sure she ate something each day, and trying to offer small comforts amid her endless vigilance. On the 4th day of Harold's hospital stay, a new nurse entered the room. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with short gray hair and kind eyes framed by thick glasses. She moved about the room with practiced ease, checking Harold's vital signs and adjusting his four. But then she paused. "Martha," she said, her head tilting in recognition. "Martha Williams. No, that can't be right." Martha looked up sharply, her face draining of color. "I'm Martha Jenkins," she corrected softly, trying to maintain some semblance of composure. "Harold's wife." The nurse frowned in confusion, clearly not understanding. "I'm sorry, but you look exactly like someone I knew in nursing school back in Chicago." Margaret Wilson was her name. "We trained together at Cook County Hospital in the early 60s. Harold, who had been dozing, stirred at the mention of Chicago. "What's that about Chicago?" he asked, his voice thick with the haze of medication. "Nothing, dear," Martha replied quickly, her words almost too sharp. "The nurse must have confused me with someone else." The nurse, still flustered, apologized and left the room, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Harold, despite his illness, found it difficult to shake the strange interaction from his mind. Later that evening, after the nurse had left, he turned to Martha. "You've never mentioned nursing school," he said, his voice quiet but filled with an undercurrent of suspicion. Martha's eyes flickered nervously, but she held her ground. "Because I never went to nursing school," she replied, her voice tight. "The nurse must have confused me with someone else." Harold might have let it go, but the next day, something even stranger happened. While Martha was speaking with the doctor in the hallway, a hospital administrator came in to check on insurance details. He glanced at his tablet and paused. "Mr. Jenkins, there seems to be a discrepancy in your wife's Social Security number," the administrator said, his voice tinged with confusion. "The number she provided doesn't match our records from her previous visit." Harold, still processing everything, replied without hesitation, "My wife has only been a patient here once for her gallbladder surgery in 2012. But the administrator wasn't convinced. "Our records show a Margaret Wilson with the same birth date as your wife, treated here in 1985. The photos in our system are similar, but the Social Security numbers are different." Harold's mind began to race. "What?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and rising panic. Martha, upon hearing Harold's mention of the administrator's visit, suddenly seemed off. For the first time in their entire marriage, Harold noticed how tense she was. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, avoiding his gaze. "There must be a mistake in their records," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. "Hospitals mix up patients all the time." But Harold was not so easily reassured. That night, as Martha sat asleep uncomfortably in the chair beside his bed, Harold lay awake, the wheels of his mind turning. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 2 below to let me know that you are still here with me. For the first time in over 55 years of marriage, Harold began to wonder, did he know the woman he had spent his life with? The next morning, Harold watched Martha as she arranged flowers that had been sent by their neighbors. He noticed the nervous energy in her movements. Her hands were steady, but her eyes kept darting to the door every time someone walked past. It was the kind of subtle behavior Harold had never seen from her before. "Martha," Harold said softly, his voice barely a whisper, but it carried a weight that made her pause. "I think we need to talk." Martha set down the vase, her fingers lingering on the glass as she turned to face him. For a moment, she hesitated, as if trying to deny the truth, but then her shoulders dropped, and she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "I suppose we do." Harold raised himself in the bed, his breath catching in his chest. "Who is Margaret Wilson?" Martha closed the door to the hospital room with a soft click, and then she pulled the chair close to Harold's bed. She was trembling now, the cracks in her facade widening. Her hands shook as she took a deep breath. "I was born Margaret Wilson in 1939, in a small town outside Chicago," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Not Martha Williams from Seattle." Harold's heart clenched in his chest. The woman sitting before him, the woman he had shared a life with for over 5 decades, was a stranger. His breath caught in his throat. "I don't understand," he said, his voice barely audible, but filled with a deep sense of betrayal. "Why would you lie about your name? Your hometown?" Martha, or Margaret, as he was now forced to think of her, looked down at her wedding ring, her fingers twisting it nervously. "Because I was running away," she said, her voice steady now, but filled with a bitter, haunted edge. She explained that at the age of 23, she had married a man named Robert Carlson. At first, he had been charming, loving even, but the man she had fallen in love with had soon morphed into someone dark and controlling. He dictated what she wore, who she spoke to, and where she could go. When she didn't follow his orders, he hurt her. "The first time he hit me, I told myself it was a mistake," Martha said, her voice now firm with the weight of a painful memory. "By the third time, I knew it would never stop." Harold's heart broke as he reached out to take her hand, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Why didn't you just divorce him?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Martha gave a bitter laugh. "This was 1964, Harold. Divorce wasn't simple, especially not from a man whose father was the police chief. No one believed me. Not the police, not my parents, not even my friends." She explained that Robert had painted her as mentally unstable, making it impossible for anyone to believe her. One night, after a particularly brutal beating that left her with broken ribs, Martha realized that staying would kill her. While Robert was on a business trip, she packed a small bag, took the money she had secretly saved, and fled. "A nurse at the hospital where I was treated gave me the name of someone who could help," she said. "A man who created new identities for women like me. It cost nearly everything I had. And so, Martha became Margaret Wilson. She traveled west, changing buses at every stop to avoid being tracked, eventually ending up in Portland, a place far from Chicago where she had enough money to buy a ticket. Those trips to Chicago," she confessed, her voice faltering, "weren't to visit a cousin named Elaine. I was checking to see if Robert was still looking for me. My contact would update me on his life, if he had remarried, moved, or was still asking questions about my disappearance." Harold's mind raced as the years of their life together came rushing back in a new, disorienting light. He thought of the way Martha always tensed when a police officer passed by, how she had refused to let their photo be in the local newspaper, why she never wanted to adopt children, because a legal investigation might unearth her true identity. "The wooden box in the attic?" Harold asked, his voice thick with curiosity and confusion. "My original birth certificate, letters from my contact in Chicago, a newspaper clipping about my disappearance," Martha answered, her voice soft, tinged with both sadness and a deep regret. "Everything I needed to hide but couldn't bear to destroy," she added, her hands trembling slightly as the weight of those words hung in the air between them. Harold sat in silence, lost in thought, as the steady beeping of the machines monitoring his vital signs filled the room with a hollow rhythm. It was as though the world outside had disappeared, leaving only this moment, this revelation that felt both like a truth he had been waiting for and a nightmare he could barely comprehend. Outside, the sky began to weep in tandem with Martha's sorrow. The rain tapped against the window, a soft, rhythmic sound, as though the world itself understood the gravity of this conversation. "Why tell me now, after all these years?" Harold asked, his voice barely a whisper, the confusion and pain evident in his words. Martha wiped the tears from her cheeks, her hands shaking with the weight of her past as if it had been buried so long that it had taken root deep inside her. "My last trip to Chicago in 2010 was to attend Robert's funeral. He died of a heart attack. I was finally free," she said, looking him directly in the eyes. "But then I realized I wasn't free at all." Her voice broke as she continued, the years of hidden pain spilling out like a dam finally breaking. "I was still living a lie with the person I loved most in the world." She took both his hands in hers, her grip firm as if trying to steady herself and him. "I wanted to tell you then, Harold. I truly did. But I was afraid. Afraid you would look at me differently. Afraid you would think that our entire life together, everything we shared, was built on a lie." Her voice faltered, the tears flowing freely now. "I'm still afraid, Harold." The room fell into a heavy silence, punctuated only by the steady beep of the heart monitor. Harold, his heart heavy with the weight of this revelation, looked at the woman who had been by his side for more than 5 decades. The woman he thought he knew so well, the woman he had built a life with, was not who she had seemed. Not Martha Williams from Seattle, but Margaret Wilson from Chicago. A woman who had fled for her life and reinvented herself, buried her past so deeply that it seemed to have taken root in her very soul. "I need some time," Harold said quietly, his voice breaking under the strain of trying to process everything. "This is a lot to take in." Martha nodded, her face a mask of understanding, though the ache in her eyes told a different story. "I understand," she whispered. "I'll go get some coffee and give you space." As she left, Harold was left alone, the silence of the room pressing in on him, his mind racing, trying to make sense of the memories, trying to find the signs he had missed all these years. The trips to Chicago, her fear of being photographed, the locked box in the attic. All those pieces that, until now, had seemed like trivial oddities. But now, they painted a completely different picture. A soft knock at the door broke his thoughts. Dr. Peterson entered, holding the latest test results, his face grim. The news was worse than Harold had feared. The cancer was spreading faster than expected. "How long?" Harold asked, the words tumbling out of him, a calmness in his voice that didn't match the storm raging inside. "A week, maybe less," the doctor replied softly. "I'm sorry, Mr. Jenkins." The doctor's words felt like a finality, an unwelcome truth that hit harder than any diagnosis. After the doctor left, Harold made a decision. He pressed the call button for the nurse. "Could you ask my wife to bring the wooden box from our attic when she returns?" he requested, his voice quiet, almost like a confession. "She'll know what I mean." The nurse nodded and left, leaving Harold to sink back into his thoughts. His eyes closed, the exhaustion from the weight of years of secrets and the rapid progression of his illness finally catching up with him. When Martha returned 2 hours later, the box was in her hands, its presence heavy in the air, filled with years of memories, fears, and unspoken truths. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 3 below to let me know that you are still here with me. The box, dark oak with a small brass lock, was about the size of a shoebox, but it held so much more than its size suggested. Harold had never seen it opened. He had never known it existed until now. "You asked for this?" Martha said uncertainly, her voice barely audible as she placed the box gently on the bedside table. Harold nodded. "I want to see what you've been keeping all these years." Martha's hands trembled as she fumbled with the small key from her purse. The lock clicked open, and with a deep breath, she lifted the lid. Inside, Harold saw yellowed papers, old photographs, and newspaper clippings, each piece carefully preserved, each piece a silent testimony to a life she had left behind. Martha handed him the first document. "My real birth certificate, Margaret Elizabeth Wilson, born April 15, 1939, in Evanston, Illinois." The words seemed to echo in the room as if they were louder than any spoken sentence. Then came a faded marriage certificate to Robert James Carlson, dated June 12, 1962. And then hospital records, the words "too blunt, too brutal, multiple contusions to face and torso." The patient claims she fell downstairs. Third such incident in 8 months. Harold's hands shook as he lifted a black and white photograph of a young woman with a split lip and darkened eye. Despite the injuries, Harold recognized his wife's eyes. "He did this to you?" he whispered, the words a knife twisting in his chest. Martha nodded, unable to speak. Her silence was deafening. Next came a newspaper clipping from the Chicago Tribune, dated October 1964. "Local woman missing, theft suspected." The article showed a photo of Martha, Margaret, smiling in her graduation cap and gown. It described how Margaret Wilson, wife of Robert Carlson, had disappeared without a trace. The article told how her husband, the grieving widower, feared she had been kidnapped or worse. "He played the grieving husband perfectly," Martha said bitterly, her voice thick with resentment. "His father made sure the police investigation focused on finding a body, not a runaway wife." The final items were a series of letters dated every few years, written in a careful hand. R.C. remarried in 1966, still in Chicago. Safe to stay away. R.C. asked questions at your old workplace. Recommend no contact with former friends. R.C. is now a police captain. Still dangerous. Stay hidden. The last letter, dated 2010, was brief. R.C. died of a heart attack on September 15, 10, confirmed at the funeral. You are free. It was signed simply, J. Who is J? Harold asked, his voice hoarse with disbelief. James Porter, Martha replied. He was a private investigator who specialized in helping women escape abusive situations. He created my new identity and kept track of Robert for decades. Martha's voice softened her words like a confession to the man she had loved so fiercely, yet so secretively. He died in 2012, a few months after I visited Chicago for the last time. Harold carefully returned the items to the box, his heart heavy with the weight of the life Martha had been forced to live. All these years, he said quietly, his voice breaking, you lived in fear, even with me. Martha reached for his hand. Not fear of you, Harold. Never of you. I was afraid of losing you if you knew the truth. Afraid you would think our whole marriage was a lie. Harold looked at the woman who had shared his bed, his meals, and his dreams for more than 55 years. The woman whose real name he had only just learned. Was it a lie? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper, filled with all the pain he couldn't hide. Martha's eyes filled with tears as she held Harold's gaze. My name was a lie. My past was hidden. But every moment with you, every feeling, every promise I made, those were all real. She squeezed his hand gently. I loved you from that first morning in the bakery. That has always been the truest thing about me. Harold sat in silence for a long time. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hospital room, a reflection of the shifting emotions within him. Outside, a nurse walked past the door, her shoes squeaking softly on the polished floor. I'm trying to understand, Harold finally said, his voice thick with exhaustion and confusion. "You've been two people all these years. Martha to me, Margaret somewhere deep inside." Martha nodded. At first, being Martha was like wearing someone else's clothes, uncomfortable, not quite fitting right. I had to remind myself to answer to a new name. But over time, Martha became more real than Margaret ever was. She looked down at their joined hands. "The woman you fell in love with wasn't a character I was playing. She was who I became when I was finally safe." Harold thought about this as the pain medication began to take its toll. "I need to rest now," he said, his voice thick with exhaustion, yet filled with an emotion he could barely name. "But I want you to know something." Martha leaned closer, her heart in her eyes. "I'm not angry," Harold whispered, his words filled with a mixture of hurt and understanding. "I just wish you had trusted me sooner." The next morning, Harold made a quiet request to the hospital staff. A head nurse, touched by his simple but profound wish, agreed to help. By afternoon, everything was arranged. When Martha arrived at the hospital room, she was greeted by a small but significant transformation. On the windowsill sat a vase of fresh flowers, daisies and roses, just like the ones from their wedding day. A small portable speaker played their favorite song, the one they had danced to at their 50th anniversary. Martha stood there, frozen in disbelief, as Harold sat up in bed, looking more alive than he had in days. He was wearing a clean hospital gown, his hair neatly combed, and his eyes sparkled with clarity and purpose. It was as though, in an instant, the fog of illness had lifted, and in its place, something profound was unfolding. "What's all this?" Martha asked, her voice trembling with confusion. Harold smiled gently, his expression soft but resolute. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady and filled with an unexpected strength. "I married Martha Williams 55 years ago. Today, I want to make a promise to Margaret Wilson." The words hung in the air, so much heavier than they should have been. Martha's hand flew to her mouth in shock, her heart racing as she processed what Harold was saying. He was speaking to her, but at the same time, he was speaking of something deeper, something more raw and revealing. "The nurse is bringing a chaplain in a few minutes if that's okay with you," Harold continued, his eyes locking with hers. "I thought we could renew our vows. No secrets this time." Martha felt a flood of emotions overwhelm her. She blinked, and before she could stop herself, tears began to fall down her cheeks. "You still want me? Even knowing everything?" Her voice cracked, the weight of those words hanging between them like a delicate thread, ready to snap under the strain. Harold reached out slowly, his hand trembling slightly as he took hers. "Margaret, Martha, whatever name you use, you're still the woman who laughed at my bad jokes for 5 decades. The woman who knew exactly how to comfort me when my mother died. The woman who sat up all night when I had pneumonia in '89. His voice deepened, becoming stronger, more urgent. "Names change. Paperwork can be faked. But a person's heart, that's something that can't be forged." Martha's heart swelled, every word he spoke cutting through the years of doubt and regret she had carried. She had wondered for so long if Harold truly saw her for who she was. If, at the core, he could accept her for all that she had been and all that she had hidden. And now, in this quiet hospital room, with a promise of forever hanging in the air, Harold's words washed over her like a healing balm. The chaplain arrived, a gentle, silver-haired woman whose presence seemed to calm the very room. 2 nurses stood quietly as witnesses to this sacred moment. The ceremony was simple, quiet, yet more meaningful than Martha could ever have imagined. Harold and Martha held hands across the hospital bed as they spoke the vows they had shared in 1965. "I, Harold Jenkins, take you," Harold paused, looking deeply into Martha's eyes. "Margaret Wilson, also known as Martha Jenkins, to be my lawfully wedded wife, today and every day we have left." Martha could barely speak through her tears, but she managed to whisper, "I, Margaret Wilson, take you, Harold Jenkins, to be my lawfully wedded husband, with no more secrets between us." When it was over, the small audience clapped softly, their applause a quiet affirmation of the love that had stood the test of time. The chaplain blessed them both before leaving them alone with their love and their newfound truth. As the room grew silent, Harold's voice broke through again. "There's one more thing I need to do," he said after everyone had left. "Could you hand me the phone?" Martha, still in a daze from the ceremony, passed him the hospital room phone. Harold dialed his lawyer's number, the urgency in his tone unmistakable. "Richard, it's Harold Jenkins. I need to make some changes to my will immediately." He glanced at Martha. "Yes, it's urgent. I need you to come to Portland General this afternoon." Martha watched him, the reality of what he was doing settling into her heart. "Your legal identity," Harold explained quietly, his words sharp and clear. "If something happens to me, you could have problems with the house, the bank accounts, my pension. Everything is in Martha Jenkins' name." Martha hadn't thought of this. For so long, she had lived as Martha Jenkins, almost forgetting that her true identity had been hidden for so many years. She had convinced herself that it didn't matter, that it was just a name. But Harold, ever the protector, had been thinking of her future. "I'm fixing it," Harold said firmly, his voice growing weaker but still filled with conviction. "Everything I have will be protected, no matter what name you use." Martha leaned forward, kissing him gently on the lips, overcome by the realization that, even in his final days, Harold was still doing what he had always done, protecting her. "After all these years, you're still protecting me," she whispered, her heart full. Harold smiled, though the smile was faint, as though it took everything he had to manage it. "Always have, always will," he replied softly. 3 days later, Harold Jenkins passed away peacefully in his sleep, the breath of life slowly leaving him as Martha sat at his side, holding his hand. She didn't call the nurse immediately. Instead, she sat there in the stillness of the moment, remembering their life together, remembering the small joys, the quiet conversations, the shared love that had held them together through decades of life. Her heart ached, but there was peace too, knowing they had faced the truth together in the end. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment below to let me know that you are still here with me. "Goodbye, my love," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion as she kissed his forehead one last time. Only then did she press the call button, knowing their journey together had come to an end. The funeral was held 1 week later, on a Tuesday, at the small church where they had been married so many years ago. The church was filled with friends, neighbors, and colleagues who had known the couple for decades. Many spoke of Harold's kindness, his unwavering honesty, and his devotion to Martha. When it was Martha's turn to speak, she stood at the podium, gazing out at the faces of those who had known only part of her story. "Harold Jenkins was the best man I ever knew," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "He taught me what love means, not just through words, but through actions, every single day for 55 years. She paused, looking at the wooden casket, its surface covered with white lilies, a quiet symbol of the life they had shared. "In our last days together, Harold showed me once again what true acceptance looks like. He reminded me that love isn't about perfect people. It's about perfectly accepting each other, flaws, secrets, and all." After the service, friends and family gathered at the Jenkins home. They brought casseroles, cakes, and warm embraces, sharing stories about Harold, and making sure Martha wasn't alone. Bill, Harold's oldest friend, stayed the longest. As he prepared to leave, he turned to Martha and said, "He told me about your past." Martha froze, her hand still gripping the door handle. "Harold called me from the hospital," Bill explained gently. "Asked me to look out for you. Said you might need a friend who knows the whole truth." Tears welled up in Martha's eyes as she realized that even in his final days, Harold had been thinking of her future. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. "It's been a long time since anyone called me Margaret," Bill added. "Is that what you prefer?" Martha thought for a moment before replying, her voice soft but resolute. "No," she said with a quiet finality. "I've been Martha longer than I was ever Margaret. It's who I am now." 3 months after Harold's death, Martha received a letter from Harold's lawyer. Inside, there was a legal document Harold had prepared before his death, a detailed account of Martha's true identity and the circumstances that had forced her to change her name. But there was something else. A letter from Harold himself. "My dearest Martha," the letter began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. But I want you to know that in our final days together, you gave me a precious gift, the truth. Now, I want to give you something in return. Freedom from fear." Harold explained that he had arranged for the lawyer to keep his statement about her past in a sealed envelope. If Martha ever needed to reveal her true identity for legal reasons or personal closure, this document would support her story. What an incredibly powerful story of love, sacrifice, and acceptance. Harold and Martha's journey together is a beautiful reminder that love isn't about perfection, but about embracing each other fully, flaws and all. Their story teaches us about the importance of truth, the strength of love even in the face of secrets, and the deep, lasting commitment that transcends time and challenges. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What's one thing you've learned from this story that you can bring into your own life? Maybe it's the power of honesty, the beauty of second chances, or the importance of holding on to the ones you love through thick and thin. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to know how this story resonated with you. If you liked this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiring stories like this one. Thank you for watching.